Material for the brain. Conversations for thinking bodies. Hello and welcome to the 24th episode of Material for the Brain podcast. I'm very happy to be able to release another episode as the time for the podcast project decreased dramatically recently, but nevertheless here we are. My guest for today is Tal Shibi, who is a native Jerusalem dance maker, an improviser, photographer, as well as a teacher and an ongoing student of movement, art, and therapy. Most recently, Tal has been sharing his passion for life, creativity, and movement through creating improvisation workshops, which emphasize tools for life such as playfulness, meditation, the courage to be seen, body awareness, breath work, and much more. Tal is a childhood friend of mine whose ideas and action had an enormous influence on my life and the person I am. First and foremost, Tal is a life improviser and a truth seeker who has been always living in the present while asking himself the big questions of life. What are we doing here? What is a worthwhile way of spending life? I shared with Tal many meaningful moments during the years, and I was very happy to host him on my podcast and to dive into his thoughts and ideas. So I hope you would enjoy this conversation, and please feel free to share with me your thoughts, questions, and ideas that came from listening to this conversation. And without further ado, here is Tal Shibi. Hey Tal, good evening. How are you, my friend?
Hi, very well, thank you.
Finally, you made it to my podcast. I'm so happy to have you.
Yes, it's a pleasure. Thank you. I was excited for the invite. We've been talking informally a lot, so we can maybe talk informally with some formality of your hosting your show.
Yeah, there's something nice about inviting a very good friend to this situation because it enables a very different type of conversation, which I'm very interested in when we are talking, but now I think it gives it a very different context.
Mm-hmm. Yes.
So maybe you can update me. What's going on? Where are you? What are you doing?
Okay, we can start physically maybe. I'm located right now in Bennington, Vermont. I'm doing MFA here, an MFA program where I get to teach the undergraduates, the next generation maybe, passing them the torch of dance, embodiment, improvisation. And that's probably the work I'm most passionate about, is using tools from movement, awareness, improvisation, somatics, creativity with the body, and giving people the context to see how that can work in their daily life. So they can be more free, so they can be more happy, so they can have more, what I would like to say, kind of a body time. Moments in life that are not just up here trying to figure it all out.
And how is life there in Vermont? Are you enjoying it?
This is a moment right now where it was snowing, so there's some snow on the ground, and I actually am enjoying the contrast. I also do miss a little bit of the warmth of the Middle East, or just warm climates, but next month I will visit my brother in Miami, so I will get some of that nutrient back.
Nice. And what are you busy teaching now, the students there? Like, maybe tell me a little bit more, like what's the content you're sharing? And
Well, I am working with them on a movement practice, and movement practice is just very more open somatic tools and different improvisational scores. And the other one It's a class called Improvisation Contact Tools for Life.
Mm.
So it's a bit mixing up the contact and the improvisation worlds.
Mm. So you call it improvisation contact.
I I do call it contact improvisation, but when I introduce it to them, I want to take all the pressure off of teaching, of grasping anything. And
Mm.
for me, the spirit of contact improvisation is just a culture more than it is a technique. And it's a culture of maybe touching on the topic we wanted to raise here of being comfortable in the unknown and being able to handle more and more space. That you don't, there is a technique, there is a form, but the culture is pointing to more to a state, I think, of experimentation, of being okay with not being told this is the technique, you're doing it right, you got it, and then you have it, which is kind of a culture that we all know from any other topic, basically. Right? We want to get it, and we want to be done with it and graduate.
Mm.
And I'm trying to tell them, no, this is just the beginning of a practice, right? Like a praxis, the engaged practice versus a theory. So you're not just here to get it and move on. Hopefully, my desire is for you to catch the flame of having a life practice. So it's not just, the 1 hour or the 2 hours that we're there together. Hopefully it's going to be a lifetime of being engaged and interested.
Mm. And how old are your students? Like what who is coming to those classes?
The students here at the college are anywhere from 19 to 23, I think.
Mm.
That's the age range. So quite young.
Mm.
Yeah.
Yeah, how do you feel? How do you feel like teaching when when there's this kind of generational gap? I'm asking it happened to me like last year. This no, I think this year in January or something like that. I was teaching in Germany in a school that I come every year to teach there. And the first time I was teaching there, I was kind of 30, and there were people kind of between 20 to 27. So I felt like, okay, I'm part of the group. And then last time I was there, suddenly I was like, I'm 38, and there was people like 19, and I felt like, oh my God, like, they stay, they stay young. And like suddenly I felt like, wow, there is a generational gap. Is it present for you, or like, do you feel it?
Yes, definitely. Definitely. I think the beautiful thing about working with movement is that, generations change and the climates change, cultural climates, or maybe these days other climates, maybe everything is shifting. Um, and then movement has a kind of way to cut through everything and and be a language that hopefully is continuing to evolve us to shift how we think. And so in that sense there's something that is different, of course, with this generation. Also, we grew up in Israel, um, so I'm used to sometimes a bit more of a directness in treating the materials. And sometimes with younger people and younger students here, I have to go a bit slower and have more patience, and not just push the material forward. Um, so yeah, there's definitely a feeling of a difference. And at the same time, my attempt is not to edit myself too much. So, and I even tell them this is not that different from any workshop that I would do to, and it's fun that you would do to adults that are older, because then it's fun to see how people grapple with the materials. Because a big part, I think, of movement is, and teaching movement is that it can be a vehicle to grappling with one's own vulnerability and one's own permission and embodiment. inner authority and inner ownership of the body. And that can be just as challenging when you're 20 as when you're 32, as when you're 66. Just depends how you approach it, how you come to it. But so, yeah.
And why, in your point of view, movement and dealing with the body has this, let's say, power? Or
that's a great question. So some of the work that I do now is, as we were talking about the students, but I do also come from a background of mostly prior to this working with adults, both in dance settings, but also in bodywork settings, from shiatsu and watsu, and then recently also with groups of men and individual men. And I think the tools of embodiment, whether it's for dance or for what we can call growth, empowerment, healing, even, is that the tool that becomes available is, and this might be connecting to our topic that we talked about fear and how fear comes into our life, is that I don't believe we can solve our confusions and our issues and our problems and our states with thinking it through just in our minds. I think we need to bring into the equation the whole of the body and how we feel in our chest, how we feel in our pelvis, how we wake up in the morning, and how we move throughout our day as part of creating a sanity for ourselves and making ourselves a sane space, a sane environment where when we come in contact with other people, they can also breathe and relax. And hopefully, I think that kind of culture will help us evolve as humans.
Yeah, sometimes I catch myself wondering with myself, like, yeah, what is this? What is this kind of obsession with the body? Like, on one hand, I'm, it's almost like a certain filter from within, from which I see the world. But sometimes I'm thinking, like, yeah, there's so many people who are not actually so engaged with the body, but they can still go through very meaningful processes. And it's a question that I always try to refine for myself. Like, what is there anything unique about this specific, type of work? Like, to choose that your body will be your material of investigation. And if so, what are the things that, like, you would never understand through doing something else? Because, like, I mean, I've seen recently like a certain post in one contact group, somebody kind of associating contact work, contact improvisation to therapy, and saying, like, yeah, this is a very therapeutic work, and it's so, I'm so sad for all of those who never encounter contact, because I'm sure they are suffering and the contact could help them. And then I think, like, is there anything like that it's really, like, genuinely therapeutic, genuinely transformative, or is it really up to the individual to do something with it? I tend to think about the second, but I'm curious to see what you think, especially because, as you said, like, you're trying to approach with the student not just the technical aspect, okay, go and do the sporty aspect, but, like, you call it tool for life.
So you're asking about you're saying you're going into talking about the therapeutic aspects, and then you had a question, and I missed the question.
Yeah. Sorry, I will. Sorry, I will clarify myself. So, what I'm asking is, do you think it's really up to the individual to harness these other aspects that can manifest positively through working with the body, or that it's really just embedded within the practice, and whether you want it or not, you're going to confront it? Observing yourself, seeing your habit, like, is it really embedded within the notion of working with the body, or that it's really up to the teacher to put the focus on that? And
mm-hmm. Okay, let's see where you're going. So I think I think really it's also a matter of what speaks to people, artistically, in their practice. And the body just happens to be, I think, a field that is very powerful, because it balances out something in the world we live in. And it gets us, especially as we move forward with our, who knows, maybe the next time we talk is hologram Skype, Zoom, or something, So we're getting further and further away from this kind of simple, earthy, sitting by the fire type presence. So it happens to be that the body is also balancing something out. It's a kind of a very powerful place to start, in the sense that once you do take that route, it's just very immediate that you come up against your own issues, your own resistances. Whatever's been swimming around in your system is going to start coming up, whether it's people's issues with themselves, their discomforts, their dealings with how restful they are within their being as a whole. So you can't kind of fake a natural confidence when you're moving. You've either moved enough and spent enough time with your system that your nervous system can relax, or it can't. You can't hang out with yourself. You're just uptight. You're just nervous. You're just off to the next distraction. And so spending time with yourself, I think, is just one powerful way to do that with the body. But at the same time, yeah, I do think it has to do with putting the attention on how this work of the body can be more than just creative dance, or more than just healing, or more than just a social event. So I would say it's both. It's both the individual using it and connecting to the types of practice that if somebody wants to heal themselves, they could use dance for that. Not necessary, though. They could follow that avenue of doing a somatic healing dance type year program that's offered. But they could also do painting if they like painting and they don't, they can't stand dance. Or I think they can do painting or writing or anything else, or cooking or baking cookies. And I think it's whatever speaks to an individual, and at the same time allows a container for presence. Yeah. So it could be baking, basketball, contact, dance, or anything else, really, or taking a walk in the forest.
Yeah, interesting. Like, I think one thing that I'm anticipating that will change radically from, that is already happening now, and when we are kind of towards the exit, is like how much the physical body is important in day-to-day life. Like, like we are advancing so quickly with the idea that you can just exist in virtual spaces. So it's like, so I wonder, like, what I'm wondering aloud, and maybe, it will be clearer, is like whether the insistence on the importance of the physical body is just like a, outdated conservative point of view, or there is really value in it that should be preserved for next generation, and like, what is it? Because I don't know, when I look at my kids, like they're already so young and they're so quickly interacting with technology, and it's just accelerating so fast that I caught myself, like, I'm also already there. Like, to some degree, I feel more comfortable communicating on Zoom sometimes than inviting somebody to speak here live with me on the podcast. So there's a certain comfort that I already developed with this format of communication that is not there. I had only one guest in that I did live, So, but I don't know. It's like a big topic, and I don't know if it's. Do you think that you are just like a all dinosaurs, or do you really think that there is like you think it's important to preserve this bodily relationship?
I think so. Yeah,
Yeah.
definitely. I definitely think
Yeah.
it's important. I think it's a big part of a feeling that we're still evolving, right? So if you were to think, humans were here 300, 400,000 years, however much we want to, whatever number we want to throw on the Homo sapien version of ourselves, and we arrived, and that's it. Then we would say, all right, maybe it doesn't matter what we do individually or collectively. If we're still evolving, it's interesting, because it happens in long spheres of time, different shifts. Um, and imagine if there once was a kangaroo that went on a tree and then found out it's kind of fun to be in the tree and they can actually get some foods from this tree and has a better view. And then after some time, that became the tree kangaroo. And a whole new different world for kangaroos because of how they moved, what they found. So there is a way that technology is also, I don't think necessarily in opposition, doesn't have to be to our bodies, to being embodied, to having this physical space. We can we can use it, but I do think that there is for what I feel like I'm bringing to balance into the world is to not forget it, to not leave it behind, to not just have our brains in some jar hooked up and then with hologram ourselves into space while we're here, some sort of like jars here on Earth, and we can just. I do personally think that bringing this with us and not leaving it behind will help us to become, I do think, more in touch and in tune, and perhaps create an evolved human that is a little bit more in tune with their surroundings and with others.
Before we dive further into the topic of fear and control that I want to talk to you, I want to give you a bit of space also for the audience to hear a little bit like your background and a bit how you got into doing what you're doing now. So to give some kind of a context to the body of work that you have developed.
Yes. Okay. Well, we can start. It's an interesting question when you think about when to start, how you get drawn into something. I think the beautiful thing for me about movement, dance, and working with the body is that I never had a conscious moment early on where I thought I will one day teach people movement and dance, and this will be my kind of vocation. So it's really lovely when something pulls you and you go with it. I think that's the first instinct, which ties into why I'm passionate about working with the body as a way to get myself and others in touch with instinct and trusting the instinct. So I think partly growing up in Israel in a somewhat, you could say, militaristic culture, a bit of a macho culture, and being myself athletic. I mean, we've played basketball on the courts together. You know that I hate losing. I have a somewhat competitive side of me that got to express itself early on, but perhaps not quite in the most creative way. And I think I was probably unconsciously, later it became more consciously, craving a way to have that physicality, to feel both strong and creative, but also have a vulnerable side um, within a practice. And so initially, I had a lot of resistance to dance because I would say that I'm a mover because I like being an intelligent mover, maybe an athlete, things like that. But dance was not something that I would be comfortable identifying with because it had so many different connotations. Some of which were just seemed silly to me. You know, like the image of a bunch of teenagers in front of the mirror, things like that, which I had no association with. So the journey for me was first just seeing how much I enjoy environments where I get to move freely, whether it was open dance parties like free dance that used to happen around Jerusalem, or it was later on contact improvisation where I could really feel that state of possibility and freedom, but also connected to myself and others. Um, and I think it just evolved from there, where I wanted to be engaged in movement in such a creative way that I wouldn't have to carve out moments out of my week to do it, but that it would always be there present for me. And so that became, I think, how I got pulled into continuing to do work with the body to become a shiatsu therapist and a dance teacher and a improvisation teacher, and today trying to bring that more into integration with conversation. So for 10 years, I think 12 years, I was really just thinking of body. Like this is the language that I'm interested in. And now in the past years, it's refreshing also the gift of maybe being stuck at home to try to find more language and have more conversations with trying to articulate what we do and trying to bring more people in that are not necessarily from dance. And most recently for me, that's been also to work with men that don't have a dance background, aren't thinking of dance, but are really curious. And more so than calling it dance, we could call it just being in touch with themselves. And that's kind of how I'm using that word or reframing it. So because it's one of these big words like love, God, dance, everybody thinks a million things. Sometimes it's worthwhile to give it a kind of a new reframing. And for now, I'll just say being in touch with ourselves and then letting creative possibilities open out of that.
Beautiful. No, it's always interesting to hear somebody you know reflect on themselves and to see like what they put in light. You know, one thing that I wanted to, we started to have a conversation about it, and I thought that it would be very nice to continue it in this format, is to some degree very connected to what is going on globally, I would say, which is the corona crisis, which is bringing something very fundamental, which is kind of a sense of fear and how we can deal with fear from uncertainty, and as you and what I sense around, and we've talked about it already, is like that how we default to handle fear with control. So first, like, what do you think about it? Like, what do you think about the idea of, okay, you have like using control from a movement, you know, from your within the body and beyond? Like, let's start rolling in that direction.
Yeah, I love this direction because it's so intimate and personal to everybody right now. And there is a lot of gold to be found uh, when we're thinking of these different channels within ourselves. So to start first with the individual, and then maybe extrapolate from there, I would say that how I deal with my own mind and seeing how easily it can be swayed into a kind of a, you know, you could say like a radio station that has that anxiety in it. And then what is my practice of bringing it back to what my station is that doesn't get so affected by all the static is something that I would consider the core practice, which however an individual can get to, being on their own station and not so much susceptible to all the static. Um, I think that can be the antidote to fear. So that's about fostering trust within one's system, one's nervous system, one's body. And I think what's so interesting about this time, also where you're living in Austria, where I'm listening to conversations happening in Israel, and then some different things happening here in the States, is that it seems that because as individuals we don't have systems in place to deal with this, what happens is the autopilot to deal with the fear that comes up is to create situational control, outer control. So because there is no interconnectivity and inner attunement with people's own individual frequencies, they immediately go to outer situational control. And then the greater the fear, the greater the control. So just recently, now it starts to become a bit of a, I mean, it's almost a bit humorous because every new day there is a new thing to be afraid of. And you can't even keep track of the variance and the things that could go wrong in your life. And it's almost as if we're getting a kick out of this, so to speak. Like we're wired to be excited about the wrong thing. I was like, why is this the dominant conversation? Oh, look, did you hear? There is something new you should be worried about. Okay, perhaps. I'm not saying to not ever be pragmatic and look into having awareness about what's going on around you. I think that's totally fine. But if we do it in a way of indulging in such a way that we just go totally away from ourselves and kind of hook on to the static of other people's conversation, anxiety, and fearful conversation, then I think it's dangerous because I think that's the slippery road towards giving away all our power to outer situational control. And what happens is, what we see happening is that the moment there's a new variant, for example, right now in Israel, nobody can enter the country. And then in Austria, I think as well, there's something new to fear. Is there a lockdown happening or something?
Yeah.
Something ramps up to deal with it very fast. I'm not saying that's necessarily negative, but it's interesting to observe, um, and to feel how do we then create an antidote so we're not just sucked in, to this channel.
Yeah, I think it's I'm trying to frame the conversation in a way that we don't need to start discussing the politics of
Of course, no,
of
of course.
Corona, because yeah, I'm more saying it to those who are listening than to you, because I think you
Yes.
kind of understand what I mean.
Yeah.
But I think for me it's just an interesting observation and like a question to open up, like why there are no other tools available on a large scale to deal with uncertainty. That's kind of the main question, no, that I'm trying to ask. Like, and as you've said, yeah, it's like the default is then to create outside control. Something needs to be regulated, and I'm first I'm asking, is it really different? Because when I think about me growing up in Israel, we. You remember when we were kids, there was I think it was the second Intifada, and there was like a lot of bombing in buses, and my mother was constantly, with a lot of anxiety every time we went to downtown in the evening. If I wouldn't call her back, there would be a lot of anxiety, and I think that there was always reason to be afraid. So, but I still feel that now it somehow became like much more all around me. I don't know. I mean, how do you experience it? Because maybe I'm also like living in my own bubble here in Vienna, but I have the feeling like that there's a lot of anxiety. Do you also feel that it's like, I mean, you've been now in the US for a while, and also you've been through the COVID crisis in Israel. Would you agree that there's like generally much higher level of anxiety?
Yes, absolutely. I would agree. I think it's one of the interesting times where the tools of working with with the body were more valuable, because when everything seems to be unfamiliar and unknown, having some practice with, oh, okay, we know how to deal a little bit with the unknown, became a lot more valuable. And I think the anxiety level has definitely gone way up, because it's very easy to be a little bit out of touch when things are relatively okay around you. But if you're already out of touch and things are not okay around you, then yeah, it's going to be very stressful.
Hmm.
Yeah.
And do you see, what do you see, like, how do you frame an alternative for, okay, I'm experiencing fear. I don't know, let's think about it like in a practical situation. How do you deal with a student who have tremendous amount of fear towards a certain exercise that you're doing? Let's think. Like, what is your strategy to handle this as a teacher?
Mm. I'm thinking of all these instances as, how do we psychologically massage ourselves in a way that we just can put the mind at ease, so it's resting enough, it feels safe enough and validated enough, you could say, that we can then be more present to what's actually here around us right now. And then part of that, I think, is to also, I don't think that all levels of, there's, we're using the word control, which is a kind of like the bad word. I don't think all things that are being done are bad necessarily. Some pragmatic things where to deal with situations are perfectly adequate. The question is, when we're dealing with something that's not there anymore, and if somebody, like, you're thinking about the body, like somebody once fell and scraped their elbow, and now you know they're in a safe studio and there's no pebbles around to scrape them, and they don't want to go into the floor. So how do we massage the mind enough to be in a space where it feels safe, is sometimes to just validate it. So if somebody's telling me they're afraid of an inversion or something like that, let's say, I'll say, yeah, it's kind of scary. It's good. That's a good instinct. It's kind of scary to be upside down, and not very instinctual, because you're more vulnerable and your head is closer to the ground, and perhaps it should not be that close to the ground. So let's go slower. Let's maybe just lie on our backs and roll our heads and get familiar with head to the earth connection. I'll try to find what is the step that is, a bit like exposure therapy. What is the step before that is less scary? So if somebody has a fear of heights, you maybe take 2 steps up somewhere and say, "Are you okay here?" And you can start like that.
Hmm.
Just getting comfortable with a little bit of discomfort.
Yeah, it's something that um again, it keep comes in as a question, like with this, like, I think that every good teacher recognizes that you should push your student in, or you should expose your student to material that are out of their comfort zone, so that there will be certain exposure to fear, to but in a gradual way, because otherwise you might traumatize them. But how to do this, I find it like very mysterious, because like
Mm-hmm.
I mean, it's hard for me even to really break it down into a principle, because it's like I just keep being surprised with what like with where do these fears come from, and like, and do you have a certain okay, so you said like slowing down, like, what do you have any like kind of a principle uh, approach to this notion? Because I guess that you're dealing with a lot of students, as you said, that are definitely meeting a lot of things that are outside of their comfort zone.
Yeah. So yeah, like I was saying, with how we put our own minds at ease, is, I think, a lot about validating our fears, validating what is already happening. And then by doing that, maybe there can be a tiny bit of space where we can inject some humor, where we can inject some lightness. We can say, yeah, of course you're afraid of that. Of course we're all
Mm,
afraid of getting some bug that, let's say we we just heard about just like a year ago, and now it's invisible and it's out to get us. Of course you should be afraid of that. Just give it like a ton of validation. And then from there, it's like, hey, it's a bit funny, right? Like, come on, kind of, we're human, we're organic material, we're here for a second, and then we're gone to some beyond mysterious
mm,
adventure. And that's the elephant in the room that we're not talking about, right?
mm,
This organic material is here, and then it's moving, it's changing, it's gone. And if we can invite some of that into the system ahead of time, then I think it can transform a relationship to fear as not something that is just there and I'm pushing it away or trying to cover it with control, but it's there. I'm embracing it. It's part of like my goofy human condition of being a spirit in a body, moving around, trying to figure things out. And with that, all right, now we have a choice. Do we want to stay frozen or take the next step? So I think it's also just creating an atmosphere of validation for each
mm,
individual. What you're feeling, what your instinct has a reason, feel into that. Go even deeper.
mm. Because I do find myself like, on a personal level, maybe because of where I grew up and the type of experiences I had, um, I very quickly lost any sense of uh, fear and concern around what is going on. And
What do you mean by
but to
that? Fear and concern about lost fear and concern about what is going on.
like about like the situation where we are finding ourselves, like with the with all the unknown around what is happening in Austria and in Israel and with the coronavirus. Like,
Oh, I see.
of course,
So,
like, and sometimes I'm asking myself, like, um, as you said, like, what is the what is the appropriate respond as an individual to a situation that is unknown, because for sure, like, if I will push other aspect of my life into big uncertainty, I know that immediately I freak out, because each individual need certainty, different types of certainties,
right.
So for me, for example, I don't need a lot of certainties around the idea of being sick, but I need much more certainties around the idea of continual work. And then it's like, and then, so in that sense, I find myself like, yeah, maybe I'm not that different than, okay, that's maybe the difference between me and somebody who is very stressed about the situation. But, and what I'm saying, like, everyone needs control in their life in order to exist. And what I'm hearing from you, and maybe that's like that, to some extent, the fact that we are avoiding confronting the biggest mystery and the biggest lack of control, which is the fact that we are organic and that we will, no matter how much we will project our brains away into some space, it's going to end at a certain point. No, and like that, the fact that this stays in the shadow, we can never relax.
Right. And it's not up to us. And then how, what kind of approach do we, or perhaps it is up to us, if you depend, language is a bit clumsy. Um, Maybe it is up to us in some sort of spirit way, but for the ego, for who we think we are, for the little mind inside that's fearful, and the instinct that is there, which is a good instinct, is that we're safe, that we're warm, and that we've got food around. And for you, you said continual work. That basically means warmth and safety for your family in some way, and maybe perhaps some sort of gratification for your identity. You're in the world, you're doing good things. That part is definitely very threatened by big shifts, big changes, as it should be. And I think whether we, that's the two roads. One is taking the anxious road, and you're going into anxiety, fear, nervousness around that, and the other is going into, all right, that's the dance, right? The state of possibility. Let's see where this goes, and that's kind of humor, excitement, silliness, um, almost like a wink, like a trickster, and I think those are the options. I don't think there are that many, more options to take, and
Yeah.
sometimes we oscillate. We're in one or the other. My question is, how do we cultivate that road where it's more like, what is this going to be? You know, and then I'd ask you, like, what are your strategies that you use when you see that your mind is very uptight? Like you said, all right, you want continual work. How do you calm yourself down when you start spinning into some place of, this is not going where I want it to go?
I want to ask you that question.
That's a good question.
It's a good question. Yeah.
So what do I do? Let's see. I start with, and this has been in the last year, where I start to check in also on a daily basis. Like, let's break it down for a second. How am I? How am I eating? How am I sleeping? How am I waking up? Simple things. Um, and I start to think of the movement and having some silence. Breathing, sitting with myself. I start to look at that as the medicine that I'm prescribing to myself. So maybe I'm going to sit 20 minutes in the morning. I'm going to do some stretching. Or I'm going to sit 10 minutes in the evening, sit and breathe, meditate, then massage myself. Then I'm going to go to sleep. I do very simple things like that. And then I can check in with myself, um, if my state is shifting or not from these practices. Or now I have access to studios, I go and dance.
Mm.
Teaching also as an art is very helpful because I get to be in a room with people. So I'm thankful to have that practice. Then I can get out of my head, move things around.
Mm.
Um, yeah, and writing as well. Sometimes I have to write out. I have to give validation to what I think is the problem and write it out truthfully.
Mm.
And be very annoyed if I'm frustrated, if I think that I don't have a future and everything is terrible, and then I'll have to write, I don't have a future, everything is terrible. I can never find a place for myself. Nobody likes me and nobody gives me validation. I have to write it out, or use the typewriter. Type it out, because then I can laugh at it and say, okay, great. Now I gave this validation to my mind. I know that there's more perspectives.
Mm.
And that's just one limited perspective that I got into for a second.
Mm. Interesting approach. Yeah, it's like, it's exactly that. How to have different perspectives. And what do you think is the connection between this and the fact that you've been improvising for in the last 15 years?
Yeah, I mean, I think, it's fun to say improvisation as a way of life because it's very poetic. In some ways it is. In other ways, there are moments where I started realizing I wanted more structure for my improvisation. Um, and yet, in terms of playing with perspective, I do think that the improvisation as a state of possibility strengthens that muscle to really be open to the moment of shifting the channel and recognizing that this is just one channel. The examples I gave are just a few examples, but they're really infinite. I mean, I could pick up the phone and call you and ask you, hey, I need another perspective, right? We can always also pick up the phone and use another human support to get another perspective, or another channel. So I definitely think that the art of improvisation is building the muscle of trusting in the fact that not everything needs to be known all the time. Yeah. And creating a relationship of trust with that, that's imperative rather than a relationship of anxiety.
Hmm. Yeah, that's a big one. Yeah, I think that what comes in my mind is how to dissociate, let's say, kind of the sense of responsibility and so when at least in my life, I'm responsible for many things. And then the sense of responsibility definitely starts to create a more of a tunnel vision. Like, okay, then, I need to bring my kids to a time to school, like that, this needs to happen. And sometimes, like it doesn't work as the way I want. And in those moments where there are things that are connected to my responsibilities, I find it the hardest to maintain this flexibility. And I remember when you and I traveled together in India for a while, I I remember that I was in the state of mind that like, okay, I decided that I want to take a bus somewhere, but if on the way to the bus that I already have ticket, I found myself with an interesting conversation with somebody, maybe I will just miss the bus because there is an interesting conversation, and who knows, maybe I should be in this conversation. So like the ultimate freedom of possibilities, like the traveler.
Right.
But and like and then it's this is something I find very challenging to preserve. The traveler mind within the like the nomadic mind while you're actually farming the land and you're stuck. If you found so far the conversation meaningful, please consider to share the episode with others and click the like button. These small actions might seem meaningless, but they are the fuel that helps the podcast project to keep moving forward. Your attention and time is highly valued, and we would love to hear more about the insights you might have from listening to this episode. And please consider to subscribe to the channel to be notified for all future uploads.
Yeah, that's an amazing question. And I think that's an art. I really do think that that's an art that many people grapple with, which brings us, even to an even bigger arena that can be talked about for hours, which is exactly that tension between, just like there can be a healthy tension also between fear and control, there can be a healthy tension between adventure and security, between giving yourself the nutrient of the securities in your life, so your framework is very clear and you can grow roots, and finding out how you can give yourself the nutrients of play and adventure and mystery and the unknown. And I think that ratio changes for each person. It's different for each individual, and it changes as people change. I'm not excited anymore about getting one-way tickets to another country, and I used to be. I thought that was a great idea to do. to get a one-way ticket and have $50. I thought that was great, and now I think that's a terrible idea. I don't know what that person was thinking and why that was, but it was an experiment, and it's like, oh, let's see what happens.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I was thinking like that maybe from I heard this example like that like if you take a herd of herbivores, so some of them have higher sensitivity to anxiety, so they're the first one to jump when something when they kind of suspect that something bad is about to happen, and then that the ones that are more relaxed, they pick up the head later. So
Yeah.
and in a way, maybe like I think like maybe we are also, maybe it's also necessary then, because I'm to some degree I'm very critical towards like people who just always freak out about everything. Like I remember as a kid I used to kind of always fight with my mother, like, why are you so afraid of that, or like just let me be, etc. But maybe like that's the kind of the essence, that some of us needs to have higher level of anxiety that we don't all of us die, like okay, someone should be taking that role. And then like as you get older you just kind of slowly tilt towards that role. but now but now surprisingly, I see like that a lot more young people, like in the pool of students that I have the feeling that the younger people have much more fear and desire for control than the older people. Like I have
Fascinating.
I have one student, she survived cancer. She's in her 50s, and she has like, she's like, I'm not wasting a minute. Like zero concern. Like I'm going, COVID, no COVID, like I'm living my life.
Mm-hmm.
And the younger generation, I feel like there's a much more need for control. And that's kind of very surprising for me because at least, I don't know if you can identify, but at least I had the feeling exactly that our youth, like in our 20s, the story was one-way ticket somewhere.
Right. I think that is fascinating. I do think that it's hard sometimes to really go out of ourselves and into thinking what would it be like to be 18, 19, 20 at this time when you're really impressionable. We're less impressionable as we get older. In some ways, we have a bit more of a solid state where we have a few perspectives built, and then we look out and see, all right, maybe today I shift a perspective or I tweak it, but you've got something already built, which gives you a little bit more, I think, good bubble wrap around you. And perhaps when you're young, you're so impressionable that maybe, as you were saying earlier, that the anxiety level just shot up around the world. It was already high, but it was high in some sort of more workaholic-y way. Then it got high in some sort of general panic way and confusion. And people were even saying, oh, who cares about work? Now I'm just panicked in general. They went from work and career and where am I heading to and how am I getting all the things to, just confusion and panic of life, like everything. The whole thing is a mess, So to be very impressionable and then absorbing that, maybe that's a reason. That's my guess, perhaps, as just to think why it might become that way. Because I do agree, it's where the instinct to take a one-way ticket is definitely, from my 80s child of the 80s perspective, is way more healthy and exciting than never leave your house if you're 21 years old.
Yeah, that's the interesting thing, like I feel like it happened to me already, like when I was teaching in a school in Germany, the school that I told you, like that I felt that like the way the kind of the rebellion towards the teacher is not by like, hey, give us more freedom to do what we want. It was like you're irresponsible.
Right.
It's like
that's
sorry,
that's absolutely amazing. Yeah.
And and that's really like super interesting, how things shift.
So
like,
the rebels are the squares. Everything.
Yeah, the rebel is
everything shifted. To be more square, the more square you are, the more.
Yeah, it's like your rebellion is like that. You buy a two-way ticket plus the full insurance, and you make sure that like you travel in an organized trip. You don't go alone anymore. You organized trip. I know everything I'm gonna do. It's like,
that's
and yeah, but I don't know. Like it makes me think like, I don't know, when we were young, and there was definitely like a lot of things to be concerned about in Israel. Again, like I don't know how much you remember in your body this period where like every time you would take a bus in Jerusalem, you would have this thought, maybe it's gonna go off, but I feel like that maybe something that I cannot comprehend because we were searching for to come out from our ethnocentric perspective into this world perspective to become like international traveler. But young people, like I guess, that are growing now, it's kind of the default way of perceiving the world.
So you're saying the default way is that they're already feeling more international, partly because of how they're connected via technology?
One way for sure, but also the general evolution of culture, and that like being ethnocentric is not cool anymore. Like who wants to, like, nationalism is not on the rise, no? Like nobody praising nationalism anymore. So like this kind of world-centric view that kind of connects us all also creates problems that are unescapable to some degree. Because I don't know, like, you and I, we could just say, okay, fuck all this problem in Israel, I'm flying to India, whatever. But now you have global warming as the, you know, like if our problem was like this kind of conflict and war in our region, now it's like this, I don't know, this global warming. You cannot escape it anymore. It's like unescapable problem. And I assume like that maybe for if I'm really trying to put myself in the eyes of somebody who is 18 now, that's quite harsh thing to deal with, you know, like a certain fear of something that is unavoidable and it's gonna just, you know, take us all into our doomsday. You know, I don't know if it's true or not, but you know, that's kind of what and that's something very hard to probably process, even if, you know, even if you have all the tools in the world.
Yeah, I think that's a nice way that I can bring us back to these original questions that you were proposing of what is it with the body? You know, why this field? And what I'm writing down for myself here is leaning into insecurity. And as you're saying, you know, perhaps a younger generation that is feeling more insecure than their rebellion is to when you come in to find out if you're following all the protocols or something like that. Um, so the shadow is that there is insecurity, but we haven't, as a collective, delved into it. Where is it coming from in us, in the individual? What is it about? And then when we do work with the body in the studio, we can really physically lean into insecurity. We can dance with another person, and that could be scary. We could lean into insecurity by, as you're saying, challenging something physical in us. We can have a sort of a safe environment to feel a measure of that insecurity and then process it in that safer environment. And I think many times of processing different insecurities lead you to think about global insecurities also in a different way, or things that you can't control, you could say.
Yeah, I'm also thinking with you, like maybe it's also because, you know, all those fears and anxieties, they are stored in the physical body, you know, and maybe that's why it's also like so immediate, the work, because they, you know, like, okay, I have a thought, it's like a construct in my mind that produces anxiety, but if I have to track it down, then I would find it in my body. I wouldn't find it somewhere in the atmosphere.
Right.
So like the necessity to, yeah, because you said something like, okay, like I need to, like, you're saying like, okay, first thing I do, I have to validate the insecurity. So like I say, okay, it's real.
Yeah, you pour a bucket of validation, like a full bucket, onto it. And you just let it be there for a moment.
And then and then I would say maybe the next step is to kind of to track it down. Okay, so I acknowledge that it's here, but where is it?
Yeah.
And I guess the answer will always be, it's in the body somewhere.
Yeah, it's probably somewhere in your chest floating around.
Mm.
And then you breathe into that, right? And you go, okay, let's really be with it. And then I think by really being with it from an embodiment perspective, it starts to shift. You're with it, you're with it, you're with it, you're with it. And then a new energy is going to come in, or emotion, or, you know, I'm just using that word, energy. A new wave is going to come in. But the suppressing of it, I think, is what gets it into this very specific channel that is the kind of the unconnected control channel, you could say. We're afraid of feeling things, and at the same time, we want to pre-safe the whole world, so to speak. This whole obsession with safe environments, right? We want to pre-make it safe, but it's not, because again, we're shifting, we're moving. So as long as our relationship to movement and shifts is that it's threatening, I think that's how we will then continue being obsessed with trying to pre-control everything. And I'm not saying that it's not good to create a nice, safe atmosphere to practice things. I just mean that it's unhealthy to be obsessed over it.
Mm.
Yeah,
And what's
like with your parents, or like I've seen you with your children. You put judo mats on, but then you really, I saw you with your son, you really tumble around. But it's not like you said, "Oh, let's do it on the kitchen floor." You put the mats down, you created a bit of cushioning, and the mats have a very specific, they fill your whole living room. And then in that space, you went wild, right? You do pillows moving, jumping around. So it's like, I think it's good. You have both a bit of cushioning and then let it go. Just like you have to just let it go sometimes.
Hmm. So so what is the cushioning now? How we like what are we missing? Because it seems to me like what I'm taking out now is like that. Okay, we are definitely missing kind of a healthy acknowledgement around us to what is going on,
Mm-hmm.
and humor to kind of soften it up. But what will be the cushioning? Because like you know, I really like when I see how the things kind of slowly deteriorate from, like from, at least in my relationship, between being extremely engaged with what is happening and now having less trust and more frustration. And then I wonder, like, what is the cushioning to a situation like that? That it's really like, I had a conversation with somebody who told me that he thinks that, that if we talk about body autonomy, so he has that we should have the right not to be infected by others.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And I'm thinking, like, the virus doesn't really care. It's like it's not playing any social role. It's just there doing whatever it wants. So like what there, so like you cannot control it.
Is
And
this
then
what you
what would
had?
be,
Is this what you were thinking about though when you were asking about cushioning?
yeah, like
I
what
thought
would
maybe
be.
you have some other specific scenario
No,
in your
I'm
mind.
like asking, like, now that we are confronted with a situation that there is so much uncertainty on a global scale, that each individual meets it very differently with
Mm-hmm.
different needs.
Mm-hmm.
What would be like a way to kind of cushion the situation? What will be the mats on the floor to soften the floor in that situation? I don't know. Maybe, I'm asking you.
Yeah, for
It's
if
a
it's
big question.
for
I don't know.
It's a good question. I think, if it's for an individual, um, if we bring it back to the individual, then it's really to I think that's our work, is to help. I mean, our tool is maybe the body, maybe it's languaging, maybe it's writing. It could be many things. I like to point to the tools that work for me. That's the only thing I can do, and I can share that perspective. And if it works for others, great. Um, And so on an individual level, if somebody's feeling a high level of anxiety, then it depends. I mean, if you're thinking of the context of making a dance out of it, if you're thinking of a
Hmm.
context of like your dance students, then I think that would be a way to give expression to something that's in the air, rather than what sometimes comes up with also the students that I have now, is that they might say, "Oh, we're not feeling 100%. We can't come to class." And then I'll say to them, "You don't need to feel 100%. If you're feeling very off, all right, it's okay. You can rest, let your body work itself out. But if you're 80%, you can come and practice in a way where you give expression to where you're at. And maybe you move slow that day, or maybe you journal, or maybe you make a dance of your 80% energy level, and
Hmm.
you're very frustrated. People that are frustrated, they're thinking, oh, I should be in a good mood and 100% to come to Matan's class, or to Tal's class, or to this person's workshop. And so I would invite, no, don't create that dichotomy in your system where you do things when everything is well, but rather give expression to that frustration, to that state, and then let
Hmm.
it shift. Like we don't always have to. Sometimes we go into a cave and let something pass. sometimes I think that's just the outdated default. Like you don't always have to retreat, be in with a blanket, and then wait. You can just let it come and go. Give it some expression.
Mm. And I'm curious also, like when we talk about, being relaxed in the unknown, and I kind of started to mention the idea of like, okay, how does it relate when you have like more responsibility? So like, do you feel that like you use the exact same tools when you're teaching? Because teaching is also suddenly, like you are confronted with a group, and you're also in a leadership role. And how does it play in your life when it comes to the ability to, handle tension, anxiety, fear?
Yeah, that's a really nice question. I was thinking about it. I wrote it down. I was thinking about before, because you were asking me also about the cushioning and the antidote and improvisation. And so I've been working lately with also in teaching and in more stressful situations where basically my mind can become attached to an outcome, right? And then what is happening is different than that outcome. That creates there a pocket of anxiety that I can notice. And then I try to just bring up this question, which is let's see how this wants to work out. And that's just a question that can create sometimes enough space for me to slow down and say maybe I had planned out this if I planned out a class where it's going to be jumping and running around, and now you have 20 people like this, nobody's going to be doing it. And so you have to like recognize that and say, okay, let's see how this wants to work out, which is another way of saying let's see how I can first lean into this happening. They're all like this, and I say, all right, let's all go to the ground then, even though I plan that we'll start running around. And I'll first lean into the state that's already there, and then let that shift. So it's like I want to say, let's see how this wants to work out is not me superimposing my desire, even though sometimes that's effective. Other times it's just a waste of energy to superimpose your desire on the situation.
Yeah, it makes me wonder, like, because like it's beautiful because what you're saying, what I understand from what you're saying is that like the first operation as a leader is to forget about your plan.
I think so.
And to understand that a plan is maybe, more like what would you say, like a certain gravity center that can affect me, but it's not. Because I wonder. It feels, like that. Like it's not the popular way of like leading. No.
Yeah, I think that's a beautiful insight in general. And I love that. I love meditating on that, where the leader is the one who can use a map but does not need one. Right? One of your students you can tell them, can you please make the next class? I want to just rest, and you go ahead. And it's fine to do that, right? It's a beautiful way to give somebody the stage. You're saying, I'm going to take it because this person wants to be the teacher class next time. But if they're very new, it's their first year, they'll have to really plan out their class and have a very strong map usually, because they're not yet able to go without a map, because that takes time. And I think that's for anything, of course. Studio and movement work is just one little tiny aspect. But you've done it very well in insisting on just having one topic, but pressing play and letting it go. And I think on most of this conversation, and from what I understand in all your podcasts, you just let it free.
Actually, I'm more of a control freak when it comes to the podcast.
But you didn't give me a whole list of questions or any
No,
kind
but
of preparation or.
no, but like you're a special individual. I know you since so
Mhm,
many years, and that's also like a certain reflection to our particular relationship. You know,
mhm,
but I had a chance that I was interviewing someone that I meet them for the first time in the podcast. So then it's just gonna be a long awkward silence if I don't
mhm,
if I don't plan something ahead. Uh, but yeah, I feel that I feel like that it's like maybe what comes clearer to me is that in a way what you're saying is that like improvisation is just not really a choice. It's not that you can choose. I'm gonna choose to improvise. You will have to improvise in anything you're doing because there's just too much changing variables to actually calculate everything in advance. And but I wonder why there is a certain necessity when you see when you're being led to kind of still have this illusion. Yeah, the leader knows where we are going.
mm,
And I'm saying it also about myself because I've been in certain classes that I felt wow, or I've been in some creative processes that I thought wow, this choreographer have no clue what we are doing, and then it was harder for me to say yeah, but I'm still gonna follow no matter what. So like and maybe that's a kind of like maybe that's a certain thing that happens that the moment you are you place yourself in a certain hierarchical structure that you really tend to give up your individual authority, and then of course why would you then of course it's gonna generate some anxiety,
mhm,
and maybe it's also related to the type of leader you are.
mhm.
um I mean, I don't know. I mean, when you're teaching, what do you feel like? Is it important for you to have a very clear that it's very clear the roles in the room, or like are you more flexible in that regard? If somebody starts to say, "Hey, why should we do maybe this?" and you might let them say, "Okay, go ahead." Start rolling from your point of view, or like,
Not so much. I like the clarity of the roles in the room.
mm,
But if somebody says, "Hey, let's roll around," I'm definitely available to be influenced or to note, okay, there's a desire in the room for rolling around. Um, I do think that within improvisation, there can be a very clear structure, and I think that the structure really helps the improvisation. Working with scores for dance, which could be a kind of a set of guidelines to improvise on, can really create the clarity, which is a bit like the trick you're talking about. That trick is needed. The trick is creating a state that, hey, everybody, I know exactly what I'm doing. Some people will misread that as arrogance. It's actually not arrogance. It's creating the confidence in the room so that everybody can work well together. And I'm calling it a trick because it's really a kind of a state. You don't have to know anything. But I do think it's beneficial and puts everybody at ease when, even though we're heavily improvising and seeing where the materials want to go, we do know exactly what we're doing because it's not a state of confusion. And
mm,
so that's that place where I do come with some ideas, with a few things written down, and it's mostly to put my mind at ease so that something bigger than my mind can actually do the work. And then there's not so much energy being wasted or exerted because
mm.
it's not a small me hoping that everything goes well, is very happy if people liked it. No, who cares about that entity? That person is a very small part of the sphere. I'm just putting that little piece of the, what we can say, the anxious mind at ease by giving him the title, a few pointers, some nice structure, and then really let what is the most interesting material or the one that's most serving the moment come through. Hopefully, that's all you can hope for, right? Just let it go and hope for the best.
Mm.
Trust the process.
Me personally, I've been kind of guided to teach in that way. So when I started teaching, Itai Atuv, the director of the group, was mentoring me, and the first class I ever taught, I made like a checklist of all the best candies I can offer to the student, and it was quite a disastrous class. And then he told me like, and then he told me like, hey, like I never plan my classes. I just improvise, and then I write what I did.
So it's like you reversed it.
yeah. He told me like just reversing the engineered idea. Just let it happen, and then you just write it, so you know what you did.
I like that.
And there's still some days I come in the morning, or it happened actually. I think also in several festivals or in situations that like people are really waiting for you to say what like what are we gonna do, and that I really catch myself like, what do I want to do now? I don't know. But then like what I feel that is easy with movement is that, again, like when the moment I start with something, it's so easy to let it evolve. So even if I'm not sure what to do, I can just say, okay, let's just start moving the pelvis from side to side and swing the arms, and I know my imagination will start opening up, and then it will become clear for me. But yeah, that's definitely maybe, yeah. Like I practice mainly improvisation in how I teach, but in my life, I'm much. I feel like it's much more difficult for me to beat that. When I think about my career, I'm much more trying to plan, much more trying to construct things, and there is a certain loss of freedom in it. But also, yeah, I guess it's hard to build up things without a certain, as you say, like a structure.
Yeah, I like what you said about improvisation being already the case. And so if it's already the case that we're always improvising, then we're not removing it, right? Like we're not saying necessarily that only people who like improvisation improvise. Everybody improvises all the time, every single day. And if we give it a small reframing of a definition of what that could mean, it could just mean a state of possibility where you don't necessarily know ahead of time where it's going. And that state, I think when you take your car out for a ride, or your bicycle or your scooter or whatever, don't you sometimes do what you described as a nomad, where you're on a certain street and then you're saying, I'm going to go check out this street. So you're maybe not in India on the bus and saying, oh, I've already got a bus ticket to Rishikesh, but if I talk to somebody interesting, I might go down to Pune, or it's not. So that storyline makes it like, oh, that's a big, right? The traveler is improvising. And if you're on a scooter in your town, maybe it's not as dramatic, but isn't that still the case that you're improvising all the time, and we all are? It's just that you have maybe less openness for it because you have a time constraint.
Yeah, I mean, I feel that there is a certain, I feel that maybe what was so unique in those experiences of traveling is the detachment from the materialistic parameter. Like I don't need to do anything like my security for the next X amount of month is already pre-given.
The structure.
Yeah, that's maybe the structure, Okay, I think you remember it, like when we were traveling, like, like I mean, I was calculating a little bit, like, okay, how cheap can I live that I can extend the amount of time I can live in this suspended lifestyle, that, like, okay, I don't need to generate anything, I can just suspend it. And I think that's maybe a big thing that enabled that kind of radical openness to whatever. And yeah, now definitely, I mean, actually my wife and I, we are now kind of debating, or like, kind of grappling with the thought of, like, maybe should we just pack things and just go travel. But when I just think about it, I get a headache, because there's like so much things to do. Just imagining, packing this house and all these things, it's like, just better keep going.
Yeah.
So yeah, like we are, like I it's maybe some kind of the essence of this spirit, but and I can assume that this opportunity that we both had in traveling in that particular way is to some degree very, very unique and new thing. If I think about, like just go 300 years ago, 400 years ago,
right,
then the improviser were the one who would like sail on a boat to the other side of the ocean to discover what's there. But that's not free from anxiety, because, like you can just die on the way. And yeah, that's a bit, so that's kind of a different type of extreme expression of it. But I have no doubt that like an essential aspect of life is improvisation, and that's why I say, like, it's a default, and you can have all the maps in the world, but the world is changing. So your map, if the map is static, then it's not true anymore, because the landscape is always evolving. Like what we just said about the culture, like I was so shocked that in my map, young people are rebellious and they give middle finger to the adult. And suddenly the young people are the responsible adults.
Yeah.
So yeah, so you have to improvise.
Yeah. Yeah. I wonder how I know a lot of the people listening that might listen to this or your podcast are within these fields of dance. Is that correct? Or somatic work or embodiment, or they have some interest in what I'm asking is, most of the people listening, we're throwing around these words of talking about life through improvisation, through dance, through scores, means something to them from a movement perspective.
Yeah, I can assume. I mean, the people that I know that are listening to the podcast, many of them are coming from the field of body and embodiment, of body and movement, and that was also to some degree the type of people I invite to the podcast, so that, like,
right,
people who see the body as a material to understand life from.
right. Because I thought maybe as I was trying to think, what is this? I'm enjoying playing with these terms and redefining them to also people that don't necessarily practice movement, when we're just talking about dance and improvisation, and what comes to me is that when we think about things like choreography, which is the predetermined set of movements ahead of time, there is something that some people are very much at ease with there, and others get a rash from that. And then as well, some people love the idea of improvisation, just going with the flow, and those are not actually in opposition, basically. I think those are really complementing each other. These two approaches to life, having everything determined ahead of time and set, and having everything open, are actually not in opposition. It's not really a competition between these two.
So can you unpack this idea?
Sure. So, as we were talking about improvisation, I was trying to think within myself, if somebody's never moved or never had it in a kind of a dance improvisation class or a contact improvisation class or a movement, what would this word mean to them? And so I was trying to think of, okay, perhaps the state of possibility where you're in a revolving door, a bit like that movie, whatever it was called, where there's a person in a revolving door, that like a old hotel in the 80s, and you could go into the
Mm,
street or you can go back into the hotel or you can stay
mm,
inside. So as long as you're in there, you have, let's say, two or three different possibilities. Let's say the hotel, the
mm,
street, maybe there's some other doorway. And that's a kind of a way to think of improvisation is being very much connected to that state that is okay with being there for maybe more than one round. Okay, and you're waiting, like, okay, the second round, oh, it wants to go into the street, you know. And a choreography for that moment would be you let the door pass once, and then you're going into the hotel, then you're taking a right into the bathroom, and there you're washing your hands, coming out, going to the street. Like everything has to be set.
mm.
And so I think as we're talking about how the mind works and different things, I think definitely our systems, our minds are very much enjoying some set material. You get continuity with your family, you get continuity with the mats in your living room and all the set materials around you and the plates that you like and all of that stuff is very important. Um, and it allows you, I think, to have more moments of improvisation.
Mm. Maybe the common ground is just the ability to make choices per se, you know.
Mm,
And the difference is like, okay, do I make the choices along the way or do I make the choices pre um, ahead of time?
mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
But still, like, you know, nevertheless, you have to be able to take choices. And I you know, in dance, there are these moments where you feel like, okay, I'm just being taken forward by the dance itself. I'm not choosing. The self maybe dissolves a bit, maybe like, you know. Um, but that's also an active choice.
Sure.
So, so yeah, maybe choosing is like brings these two opposing, so to speak, strategies together. So
Which one is more, would you say, native to you?
between choreography and improvisation,
Yeah, which style is more suits you?
it's interesting. Like now, if I just speak about, you know, the my classes and my programs. So I'm as in the teaching role, I'm always improvised, but I teach more set ideas nowadays.
Mm-hmm.
So I teach a lot of things that are repetitive. You can repeat them if you want, and but I improvise my way into them. But I always balance it, you know, and I think that like lifestyle and at the end I feel like, you know, like sometimes I think about my you know, my career and my ambitions and what I want to do, and then when I think about it a lot and I want to start making a plan, normally I get tired.
Mm-hmm.
And then I'm like, let's just see how it's gonna go. You know, so maybe that's also why like I have a certain limited with the amount of complexity of the structure that I can build. But yeah, there is a certain freedom when you don't construct things, you know. And I'm very attracted to that because my biggest passion is to just be able to play with the material, you know, to be in the studio and to if I have to choose between, I don't know, going to a jam or going to an open mat in jiu-jitsu or whatever, like doing something that I can be physically in a physical improvisation where I will experience it directly rather than, you know, constructing something that will enable something to happen, then I go for the experience. But yeah, my life is very bound now with a lot of things that are stronger anchors. So then it's a new, if you have to say between the two.
I would say that I'm definitely an improviser that is now curious about structure. And that definitely is both in the art and in life. I'm curious about how structure aids the improvisation, basically. So if it's creating material, I really like to create a score where I have some knowns and some unknowns. And I think that's really the art that excites me. It's almost like I know there's going to be a spotlight coming here, but I don't need to know what I'm going to do with it. Maybe I'm just going to throw a pair of socks into it. Things like that. There is definitely a delight in it's almost like a magical delight where you feel like you can control some elements of your life. You say, I can create this little thing here. And then there's another delight in really seeing what wants to happen there. So I would say initially improvising, and now maybe also as it's less familiar to me, I'm excited to learn more about also structure, also for my life. Thinking how I can create more structure to support the unknowns. Because it's also I'm also thinking what's uncomfortable for me. If I'm comfortable with improvising and less comfortable with the structured aspects, I want to get more comfortable with that, basically.
No, I really enjoy the fact that I took this choice to improvise this conversation with you. Even though, as I said, there is always a sense of improvisation, because even when I have a very clear ideas of what I want to speak with you, I don't know what you're gonna say. But it's a good example to take a concept and to go through the direct experience of it in order to portray it on a certain meta level, because in a way I like to talk about the art of improvisation when you kind of know what your guest will say. That's gonna kill the spirit of it. Tal, I want to also because I know there was another big topic that I wanted to talk to you, but I don't think that
for next time
we're gonna open it today. But I still want to give you some space to talk about, I know that you are now constructing structure to hold also online work support for men and kind of men work. And I wonder if you wanna talk a little bit and just tell people who are listening who might be interested to connect to you and to get exposed into your ideas that are also related to something that is very concretely anchored in life, but through this lens.
Yes, thank you.
Maybe.
Thank you, brother. Yes, I'm excited, very excited for the past years to work more with men in men's groups and see all these different things that we talked about, how helping each other gain more perspective and basically encouraging each other to live from within, from our instincts, and as well being able to express everything we're going to within work of a men's group or one-on-one is something that's very interesting, especially for men who have not ever tried that. I am working on this will be up on my website. It's coming out shortly, which is just my name, talshibi.com. But I guess we could put also my email. It's just, again, my name, talshibi@gmail.com.
Yeah, I will write all this.
Anybody can reach out, and I like to work with people also men and women, but also for a number of sessions where we can break down how our different things that we're working through can be worked through within um, all these tools that we talked about: meditation, movement, writing, creativity. Yeah, it's definitely very, very fun work.
Mm. Yeah, and I experienced it firsthand with a session with you, and I can really recommend for anybody who's interested in bringing to their life very practical tools that are coming from areas that are not that common, and to really expand the possibilities, to be aware for the amount of possibilities, to reach you and to dive into a process with you.
Thank you so much.
And I'm also thankful just for the fact that I can witness your process, this life process. You're one of my you're one of the only friends I carry from childhood. So
Hey, it's a pleasure. It's a pleasure also from this side, and I really appreciate the platform, and I'm always influenced and encouraged by your work. Even in this conversation, and seeing you opening up your living room to have conversations with people, I think is such a delightful practice.
Thank you for being a guest here. And for sure, like I would love to invite you again and dive into that topic that you started sharing when the time is right. So thank you, man, for coming here.
Thank you.
I'm looking forward for the next time.
Yes.
Good night.
Ciao.
If you want to see more precious and insightful moments, make sure to check our short clips playlist. To see longer interviews, check out the full episode playlist just below it. And to be notified for all future videos, click the subscribe button and don't forget to hit the notification bell. See you on the next episode.